What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, May 20th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have an 8-game MLB slate tonight. Really good weather across the board. Don't have to worry about any of that. So should be a fun one. Nice slate size. I know for me, that like 8 to 10 game range is my preferred slate size. It's not so small that you're stacking against really, really good pitchers. It's not so big that a ton of random stuff will happen, but obviously less of it if you have 8 games compared to like 14 or 15. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully you are too. Starts at 6:40 Eastern, so keep that in mind. Don't forget to get your lineups made thinking it's at 7:05. And as always, we're going to go game by game, talking about pitching, hitting, strategy, whatever else in each game. If you're looking for a specific game, you can follow along by seeing which game is highlighted up here at the top. That's how, if you're going through the video later trying to build your lineups, that's how you can quickly find which game I'm talking about. Give the video a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. If you have questions during the show, throw them in chat. Happy to talk about it, whether it's overall strategy, slate specific, whatever it may be. Happy to take those questions as well. And we're going to jump in with Milwaukee taking on Miami to start things off. We have Ryan Weathers on the mound for the Marlins, Joe Ross going for the Brewers. So neither of these pitchers are particularly good, but they are both really, really cheap. It is a good pitcher's park. They're both showing up as a little bit under-owned for me. Neither one looks like a priority, but Weathers is projected for about 5% ownership right now. Ross projected for about 9%. In the lineups that I built before the show, I'm just getting a little bit more than that. That's not to say that I am definitely playing a lot of these guys or playing more than the field in tournaments. Way too early to know that. But if you do need a low-owned, cheap pitcher, they both look fine. They both look a little under-owned to me, but neither one is a priority. Obviously, a much better matchup for Joe Ross than for Ryan Weathers. Miami just not a very good offense compared to Milwaukee. It is a park downgrade for these Milwaukee bats. Joe Ross does have a little bit better strikeout stuff than Weathers, but it's also a better matchup for him. Offensively, Milwaukee's going to look better than Miami is most likely. And you can see it up here at the top. Sorry, I got signed out of some stuff, so trying to sign back into it to get actual numbers. But Milwaukee going up against Weathers, who has struggled overall basically throughout his career. And we have a lot of good power bats for the Brewers. Willy Adames looks good at 5K. Yelich, lefty, not overly concerned about that. Monasterio, Joey Ortiz are both cheap. William Contreras has been fantastic this year. Probably the best hitting catcher in baseball. I don't know for sure. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I do know that he is absolutely tearing the cover off the ball. $5,800 for him is a hell of a price tag, but it's warranted. He's a good hitting catcher. This is a legitimately good hitter in a good spot. So hoping to get to him today. Fielded about 10%, 10 to 15% on most of these guys. They showed up that way for me as well. On the Miami side, they are cheaper. They're not my favorite team to get to, but getting the Jazz Chisholm against Joe Ross is going to look fine. He's projected for about 6% ownership. I'm getting to about 7% right now. Owen Miller as a value play, if he's in the lineup, looks pretty good at 2,400. But overall, Milwaukee looks better than Miami. Miami does look like a pretty good value team, though, if you need cheap offense. No, I haven't looked at the first Atlanta-San Diego game, West, so I don't have anything there. Don't even know who's pitching in that one. Next, we have Minnesota taking on the Nats. Minnesota is favored in this one. Pablo Lopez on the mound for the Twins. Not a good strikeout matchup for Lopez, but a very good strikeout pitcher overall. So looking to get to him. He showed up in about 24% of the lineups that I built. Field's projected to get to about 30%. Again, not a good strikeout matchup, but a very, very good pitcher, striking out 28.7% of the hitters that he's faced so far this year. 4% walk percentage, 24.8 K minus BB percentage is excellent. 3 flat xFIP is very good. There are some other good pitching options on this slate as well, but he looks good. 9,500 is a pretty fair price tag, given the difficult strikeout matchup. Mitchell Parker on the other side, not showing up for the field, not really showing up for me. He has had a solid start to his major league career so far, but at 7,500 on this slate just doesn't really seem like anything that I need to get to. Minnesota's showing up as a top 5 stack right now as far as all stack types. If you look at just 5-mans, they are also showing up as a top 5 stack. So no issues getting there. Like I said, Mitchell Parker has had a solid start to his major league career. He doesn't project to be a great pitcher, or at least at this point in his career. Most projection systems have him with about a 20% strikeout percentage, 4.5 to 5 FIP. Not somebody that you're overly concerned about taking hitters against. So on an eight-game slate, Minnesota is going to look pretty good in this spot against Parker. Byron Buxton at 4,400, nice price tag there. Carlos Correa is cheap, 4K at shortstop. I like getting to that. Jose Miranda's really cheap. Jeffers has power at catcher. Pretty easy to get to this Minnesota team and then build good stacks around them as well. So I like that. Washington on the other side, if you're going there, I think it's purely a game theory play to negatively correlate with the field. If Pablo Lopez pitches poorly, 30% of the field just lost a very expensive pitcher, and you also have a low-owned stack. That would be the case for Washington, but in terms of just chances of success, they are going to show up pretty poorly. CJ Abrams is really, really good. Gives you a lot of power, gives you a lot of stolen base upside. So individually, like if you didn't want to full stack the Nats, but you have a lineup that doesn't have Pablo Lopez, CJ Abrams is a good way to just get a little bit of negative correlation without having your entire lineup revolving around a team in a really bad spot. Abrams can obviously come through individually. He's a really, really good hitter and a pretty high upside, a really high upside play at 1 to 2% ownership. So I do like him, even if you're not full stacking the Nats, as a way to be different in your non-Pablo Lopez lineups. Next, we have the Red Sox going into Tropicana Field. So a park downgrade for them. Low total in this game sets up pretty nicely for pitching. Tanner Houck on the mound for the Red Sox. Taj Bradley going for Tampa Bay. Both of these pitchers are pulling ownership, and it's warranted. Tanner Houck at 9,100. Fields at about 15%. I got to about 19%. Houck's having a solid season. There are strikeouts in this Tampa Bay lineup. They're middle of the pack in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. But again, this is a park upgrade for Tanner Houck as well. 23.5% K percentage on the Rays active roster against right-handed pitching so far this season. 104 WRC plus, so slightly above average in terms of production, but there are strikeouts to be had. Houck, most of these Boston pitchers have been good this year. Andrew Bailey's done a really good job with them. Houck striking out 24% of hitters, 19.6 K minus BB percentage, looks pretty good. 2.86 xFIP is excellent. So at 9,100, I like getting there. I think he's going a little bit under-owned. On the other side, good price tag for Taj Bradley at 8K. He's really popular, projected for about 29% ownership right now. I think that's a little bit high. He showed up in about 17% of the lineups that I built. So I do think he's a good play at 8K, but I think the field's maybe getting there a little bit too aggressively. That's not to say, that doesn't mean he's a bad play. You shouldn't play him, any of that. I think people tend to get a little bit too caught up in individual ownership. It's just saying that I think the field's playing him at a little bit too high of a rate in lineups where maybe I'm playing popular bats or I have a popular pitcher in the other pitcher spot. Maybe I go to, say, Tanner Houck if I can find that salary because he's projected for half the ownership. And I think he's pretty much just as likely, actually a little bit more likely, to be in the optimal lineup compared to Bradley. So it's not saying don't play Bradley. If you have a lineup where he fits, he's still a good play. I just think the field's getting there a little bit too much. Offensively, if you go to either team here, I think it's basically just to negatively correlate with the field, just like we were talking about with Washington. Both of these offenses are above average against right-handed pitching. Boston has a 111 WRC plus this year. Tampa Bay, like I said, 104. Identical 23.5% K percentages. So there are strikeouts, but there are also good hitters here. Rafael Devers at 5K. Nothing wrong with getting to him pretty much ever. Willie Abreu is off to a very good start this season. He's still reasonably priced. Jarren Duran gives you stolen base upside in addition to hitting upside. Connor Wong is a cheap catcher. In a limited sample so far in the major leagues, Taj Bradley has also had some reverse splits issues which looking at the types of pitches he throws might be a long-term thing. His best secondary offering is more effective against left-handed hitters. So not to say, it makes Connor Wong look great or it makes Tyler O'Neill look great, but it is maybe a little bit of a boost for the right-handed power bats in this lineup in particular. So Boston's cheap. They have good hitters. They are going up against a 25 to 30% owned pitcher. It makes them an interesting tournament stack, even if they're not going to come through all that often in the lineups where you don't have Bradley. On the other side, I don't like Tampa Bay quite as much for a couple of different reasons. One, Taj Bradley is good. I do think that Tanner Houck is better, but also Tanner Houck's getting like half the ownership of Bradley. So while there is still negative correlation there, and you are leveraging against around 15% of the field, that's obviously not as strong as going up against a 25 to 30% owned pitcher when these offenses look very, very similar. So I do prefer the Boston side, basically just because Taj Bradley is getting more ownership than Tanner Houck is. Seattle's taking on the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, so nice park upgrade for the Mariners bats. Obviously, there are still a lot of strikeouts in Seattle's lineup. And we have Logan Gilbert going for Seattle, Marcus Stroman going for the Yankees. So a good real-life pitcher in Stroman, not a great DFS pitcher. And he actually just hasn't been as good overall this year as he typically is. Maybe those numbers get better, maybe they don't. But he's walked 12% of hitters, just shy of 12% of hitters, 4.21 xFIP, only striking out 19.9%. So you do expect a higher strikeout percentage in this matchup than on average. I do expect him to strike out more than 20% of hitters today. Seattle strikes out a ton. They lead all of baseball, the 29.6% K percentage against right-handed pitching this season. But it's still not a great strikeout pitcher. 13% ownership projected for Stroman. He showed up in about 7% of the lineups that I built. He's fine if you need somebody in that price range. Maybe you don't want Taj Bradley's ownership in a specific lineup, so you go to Marcus Stroman. That's fine, but I do certainly prefer Bradley in that price range. On the other side, Logan Gilbert looks like a pretty interesting tournament play to me. Obviously, a very, very difficult matchup, a substantial park downgrade for him going into Yankee Stadium, but he is also a very good pitcher. He has made improvements this year as well. If you look at his numbers this year compared to previous seasons, striking out 27.4% of hitters. In the past, he averaged about 24%. Stuff Plus is much, much better this year. 122 this year. In the past, it's been about 104. So we're far enough into the season now. You have enough starts from Gilbert where you should be looking at his actual numbers as opposed to Stuff Plus. But if you just kind of balance it out, or his strikeout percentage, his K minus BB percentage, these numbers are starting to stabilize, and you can look to them as opposed to just looking at Stuff Plus and saying, oh, well, his stuff's better than in the past, so I think his numbers are going to be better. But you can see that there's a reason that his numbers are better. His stuff is better this year. 19.3 K minus BB percentage, 27.5% strikeout percentage. That is backed up by an improvement in stuff as well. Now, it's obviously a brutal matchup against the Yankees. Really, really tough park to pitch in. That's why you're only getting 8% ownership coming into Gilbert. But he works as, let's say, like a Pablo Lopez pivot. Not saying I like him more than Pablo Lopez. Pablo Lopez showed up in about twice as many lineups as Gilbert did. But if you have a lineup where you have a popular offense, maybe you have Taj Bradley as your SP2 who's getting 30% ownership, and you don't want Pablo Lopez at 25 or 30% owned in that lineup, Logan Gilbert gives you a similar range of outcomes as far as his ceiling and floor go. So from a range of outcome standpoint, not all that different from Pablo Lopez. Slightly worse strikeout percentage, slightly worse xFIP. He's not quite as good as Lopez. The matchup certainly isn't as good, but Gilbert does still give you a high ceiling at low ownership. Makes him an interesting tournament play to me. Offensively, I don't mind getting to either offense here. Obviously, the Yankees in Yankee Stadium are just always going to be a really high upside offense, even though they have a very difficult matchup against Gilbert. Gilbert has allowed 1.07 home runs per 9 so far this season, and it's obviously much easier to hit home runs in Yankee Stadium than it is in Seattle. But for the Mariners, I do kind of like them here. Stroman doesn't miss a lot of bats. Now, if he strikes out 10 guys tonight, he won't be the first relatively low strikeout guy to just cut right through the Mariners lineup, but he doesn't miss a lot of bats. The Mariners do have a lot of power in their lineup. It's just that they swing and miss a lot as well, and their home stadium is the worst place in baseball to hit. But they're getting this park upgrade now to Yankee Stadium against a pitcher in Stroman that doesn't get a lot of swings and misses, allows you to put the ball in play. They're really cheap. Julio Rodriguez, 4,800, the most expensive hitter in their projected lineup. Jorge Polanco, if he's back, is only 3,400. Rojas has been leading off. He's 4K. Moore has some power. Raleigh gives you cheap power at catcher. I like getting to the Mariners here. Mitch Garver, if you can't afford Cal Raleigh, Mitch Garver is $1,000 less expensive. And they're showing up third most in all stack types. They're showing up the most right now as far as 5-mans go. And it has nothing to do really with their implied run total. The implied run total is relatively low at 4.2. It's just how much power you have in this lineup, how inexpensive they are. They fit really easily into a lot of different roster constructions. If you 5-man stack Seattle, you have the money left over for a really good mini stack from another team and good pitching. If you stack a more expensive team, grabbing a couple guys from Seattle, you can balance out that salary without giving up home run upside. So Seattle's going to fit really nicely into lineups tonight. They're not projected for a ton of ownership. I like them quite a bit here. Good park, obviously. So I like getting to Seattle, especially if this ownership stays where it is. For the Yankees, again, you're kind of just playing, if you get to them, you're just playing their talent. Logan Gilbert's certainly not a pitcher that I want to pick on, but Aaron Judge at pretty low ownership, Juan Soto at low ownership. Stanton's been hitting really, really well. Obviously, you can get to these guys on an 8-game slate, getting to the Yankees, who have like a 125 WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year, 129 now. 129 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. Getting to them at low ownership when only 16 offenses are playing is certainly not a bad tournament strategy. Now, before we get into the next game, as a reminder, I am soon launching a new site with Uticow, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, some of the best players that there have really ever been in DFS. It's going to be a high-level strategy site. The goal is to make you better at DFS so you can do a lot of things on your own. You're not as reliant on other people to, give you projections and content and all of that stuff. And, also just make you a better player overall. We'll have a Discord with access to us where we can talk, specific slates, strategy, all of that. But we'll also have higher level training videos, overall strategy, so that you can improve. If you're interested, check the description below. There's a link to Endgame Syndicate. Click that link. There's an email sign up page on that landing page so you get a notification when the site goes live. Really excited about that. I know I'll learn a lot from those guys. I think you all will learn a lot from us as well. So that should be really fun going forward. Hopefully that launches sooner than later, or it will be launching sooner than later, I should say. So check that out. Now moving on to Detroit at Kansas City. Oh, also on that topic as well, if there's anything that you are interested in hearing me talk about, me doing videos on from a strategy standpoint, post those questions or ideas in the comments, or just reach out to me on Twitter. If there's stuff that you've wanted to hear from me, wanted my thoughts on strategy wise, let me know. Always looking for video ideas, like looking to give you guys what you want. So reach out with any ideas that you have, anything you want me specifically to talk about. Now moving on to Detroit at Kansas City. Kauffman Stadium, not a good park for home runs, but a pretty good park overall for offense. Pitching here is not super appealing. Michael Wacha, 6,600. Reese Olson coming in at 6,900. Both of these pitchers are fine. Reese Olson striking out 21.7% of hitters this year. 3.77 xFIP, has yet to allow a home run. Obviously, that will eventually change, but he's been solid so far this year. Wacha striking out 20.5% of hitters. 4.27 xFIP. But neither guy's showing up a lot. They are reasonable value options. Both guys sub 7K if you needed a cheap arm, but neither one looks like a priority here. The offenses, I think, are going to look quite a bit better. Kansas City coming in as the most frequently stacked team in the lineups that I built before the show. Detroit showing up second, and that's all stack types. If you look at 5-mans, Detroit still showing up second, Kansas City showing up fourth. So both of these teams just give you solid young players, a lot of upside. Bobby Witt Jr. showed up in about 15% of the lineups I built. Field's only at about 8% right now. I like getting there. Tons of power, tons of speed, obviously. Shortstop is a really, it's a weird position because your average shortstop doesn't hit for a lot of power. But then you have a handful of the best players in baseball right now that are all shortstops. On this particular slate, you have a few of them. You have Mookie, you have Witt, you have Gunnar Henderson, you have CJ Abrams. So you see the ownership kind of get spread out amongst those guys, but that's why Witt's only getting about 8%. Looks a little bit low to me. Colt Keith, 2,400, second base. He's been awful this year, no doubt about it, but he is a pretty highly regarded hitting prospect. He is really, really cheap. He really can't be any worse going forward than he has to date. So getting him at that $2,400 price tag against a pitcher in Wacha that doesn't miss a lot of bats, I think that's a pretty high upside value bat if you need savings at second base. Michael Garcia is showing up a lot. Perez is showing up a lot. Pasquantino is showing up a lot. So right now, both of these teams just going under owned for me. Obviously, it's early in the day. Maybe the ownership comes up. Maybe by the time confirmed lineups come out and we get to lock, I'm not as interested in these teams. But right now, they look good. And again, it's not that either pitcher is bad, because they're not. But there's not a lot of really weak pitching on this slate. This is overall a good park for offenses, home runs aside. As a side note, on FanDuel, that makes it even more appealing because home runs are weighted less on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings. If you're just getting singles, doubles, driving in runs, that works out really well for your FanDuel stacks. On DraftKings, it's nice, but you do need some home runs mixed in there as well. This park isn't great for that. But overall, just good pricing here. Talented hitters. I like getting to this game. Riley Green on the Detroit side at 5K, having an excellent season as well. Very, very good young hitter. So I like getting to this game, at least right now, looks good. Next, we have Sonny Gray taking on Dean Kramer in St. Louis. Baltimore taking on the Cardinals. Sonny Gray has been excellent this year. I think he's going a little bit under-owned here. I am a little bit higher on him projection-wise than most places in the industry. Probably not surprising to anybody that has ever heard me talk about Sonny Gray. But so far this season, he has been just flat-out dominant. 31.9% K percentage, 4.8 walk percentage, 27.1 K minus BB percentage is the best on this slate. The only pitcher pitching today who is in that ballpark is Chris Sale, but that game is not on the slate. So best K minus BB percentage on the slate, 2.46 xFIP is the best on the slate. He has almost identical numbers to Chris Sale this season. We all know how dominant Sale has been. Gray missed the start of the regular season, but he's been excellent since coming back. Now the matchup here is obviously really, really difficult. You have a ton of just good bats in this Orioles lineup, but the park is pretty favorable to pitch in. The Orioles don't strike out a lot, 19.4% K percentage against right-handed pitching, 107 WRC plus. So the matchup is why you're not getting more ownership or more love to Sonny Gray. He is also more expensive than Pablo Lopez. He's more expensive than Logan Gilbert. So I understand that he's relatively difficult to get to, but he still showed up in 20% of the lineups that I built. Field's at about 14 to 15%. So I'm a little bit higher than the field on Sonny Gray. If you can find the salary, certainly a very high upside, relatively low owned option. Dean Kramer also going a little bit under-owned for me. Mediocre matchup. The Cards are off to a pretty slow start overall this season, but they do have a 106 WRC plus on their active roster against right-handed pitching. 23.7% K percentage is top 10. Dean Kramer is just a pretty solid pitcher. 25% K percentage this year, 3.76 xFIP. He has allowed 1.76 home runs per 9, which is certainly an elevated number, but he does pitch his home games in Camden Yards where left-handed bats are going to hit a lot of home runs. Obviously, it's really difficult for right-handed bats there, but basically no ownership right now projected to Kramer at 6 to 7%. I think he's a good way to be different. He's certainly a viable pivot away from, say, Taj Bradley if you're looking to save some ownership in a lineup where you need a pitcher in this 8K range. So I think a pretty good contrarian option. Offensively, I don't anticipate really wanting to get to either offense here. Now, you can there are strong cases for either one. For Baltimore, I think it's that they're just really good. Getting to basically unowned Gunnar Henderson, Ryan O'Hearn, Ryan Mountcastle gives you a lot of upside, but it's a brutal matchup against Gray. It's not a great park to hit in. Gunnar Henderson's expensive. The rest of the Orioles are pretty fairly priced. Adley Rutschman's expensive as well. The rest of the Orioles are pretty fairly priced. Not cheap, but not egregiously expensive. On the Cardinals side, they are very inexpensive. And Dean Kramer, like I said, he gives up home runs. Overall, he is a good pitcher, but we don't have a lot of terrible pitching on this slate. And, you're getting a $3,900 Goldschmidt, $4,100 Nootbaar, $4,100 for Arenado, $3,200 for Gorman, $3,400 for Herrera. You can build really high upside St. Louis stacks where you're in a situation, where if they do get to Dean Kramer, then you probably have really, really good lineups because you have such good pieces around the Cards. So they're not showing up a lot in the stacks that I built. I didn't expect them to. It's not a good park. It's not a good matchup, but they're kind of like a poor man's version of Seattle to me. Seattle has the better park. I think the matchup is kind of similar where, Stroman is a good enough pitcher. Kramer's, a good enough pitcher. He's having a better season than Stroman. So I think that the matchup's a little bit worse for St. Louis. The park is worse, but the idea holds where you can build a really high upside team around the Cardinals. I don't anticipate getting to a ton of them, though. I do think Kramer, like I said, is going a little bit under-owned as well, so I do like getting to him. Angels taking on Houston in Houston. Astros pretty big favorites here, which isn't surprising because they are good despite their record. The Angels are not. $8,800 price tag for Framber Valdez. He's projected for 32% ownership. He only showed up in about 16% of the lineups that I built. I get it. Like, he's a good play. I just don't think he should be getting that much ownership when you have other talented pitchers on this slate. His strikeout numbers are down quite a bit this year, only striking out 21.2% of hitters. That said, he's still a very good pitcher overall. 3.02 xFIP, good ground ball pitcher, gets a lot of weak contact. The strikeout numbers are obviously concerning, but he is only 8,800. In the past, like last year when he was striking out 27% of hitters or whatever it was, he was a lot more expensive. It is a good matchup against the Angels. No Mike Trout obviously makes that lineup pretty weak, but I think he's a good play, just going a little bit over-owned. I don't mind turning some of like the $8,800 Framber Valdez into $9,300 Logan Gilbert in large field tournaments, saving some money, going to Dean Kramer, doing stuff like that. But he is a good play. If you have a low-owned lineup, by all means, get to Framber Valdez. On the other side, Reed Detmers, brutal matchup, very good strikeout pitcher. Gets a park upgrade here as well, but just a really, really tough spot against the Astros. I do think he's going under-owned. He's not projected for any ownership right now. He showed up in about 9% of the lineups I built. $7,300 for a pitcher with a 26% strikeout percentage, 3.67 xFIP is pretty appealing at low ownership. It's just that the Astros are such a difficult team to strike out. They have so many good hitters throughout their lineup. It's just really tough to be confident in Detmers. I am intrigued at that salary though, but I guess even in that price range, like you have Reese Olson, you have Michael Wacha, not the same level strikeout pitchers, but also not in as bad of a matchup. So in large field tournaments, I think there's a case for Detmers, but certainly not something I expect to prioritize. Certainly not a high probability play. Offensively, the Astros, if you can get to them, are going to look pretty good. The field is projected to get to them a bit more than I am. 13 to 14% ownership coming into Tucker and Altuve. I got to 8 to 9%. Yordan Alvarez pulling 15% ownership. I got to about 6%. Now, one thing I will mention is that Detmers does generally pitch a little bit better against opposite-handed hitters. He just has stuff that plays better against them. So I wouldn't be shying away from Tucker and Alvarez because of the lefty-lefty matchup. They hit lefties really well. Detmers isn't lights out against lefties by any stretch. So if you are going to the Astros, by all means, include those guys. I do think they look like they're going a little bit over-owned, but they are still a solid stack, showing up sixth most right now in all stack types for me, showing up middle of the pack as far as five-mans go. So if you can get to the Astros and find low-owned guys elsewhere, perfectly fine. Obviously, a really, really high upside offense. It's just a tough matchup. Detmers is a good pitcher. On the other side, I don't really want to be getting to the Angels too much. I think the case is simply that Valdez is getting 30% ownership. So if, like we were talking about with other teams like the Nats, if they do well, then you're in a pretty good spot in large field tournaments. But the problem is just that Valdez is so good at limiting hard contact and keeping the ball on the ground. It's just tough to really find anything that you feel good about with the Angels. So if you're going there purely a game theory play, there's nothing about Valdez that stands out and makes me want to get there. And then finally, we have the Dodgers taking on the Diamondbacks. Slade Ciccone on the mound for Arizona. Yoshinobu Yamamoto on the mound for the Dodgers. Yamamoto is having an excellent season. He started out, got lit up in his first start coming over from Japan, but overall he's been very, very good. 27.5% K percentage, 3 flat xFIP, only walking 5% of hitters. Not a great matchup against the Diamondbacks, but a good pitcher. Arizona against right-handed pitching overall this year, 21% K percentage, 93 WRC plus. It's not a matchup that you're running away from. So Yamamoto looks pretty good. Field's getting to him about 22 to 23% of the time. Showed up in about 17 to 18% of the lineups I built. So nothing really crazy there in terms of how I'm viewing him relative to the field. Just looks like a good play. I do think it's interesting that he's getting like 1.5 times the ownership of Sonny Gray. He is $500 more. The matchup is a little bit better against Arizona, but I do think that the ownership should probably be about the same. I actually had Gray show up a little bit more frequently than Yamamoto, but kind of splitting hairs. They both look like good options. They're both good pitchers. Ciccone, I don't really have any case for getting there other than I guess he's 5,100. I've said it a million times, but if you're a major league starting pitcher and you're not on a pitch count, 5,100 is too cheap of a price tag. But because of the way MLB DFS works, it doesn't really matter. Like if this were NBA, you would be and you got a value, you just have somebody mispriced like that, you're just jamming them into lineups. But because in baseball, the way the scoring works, you are automatically going to have a ton of value coming from your bats because whoever hits a home run ends up being a really good value no matter what their salary is. You don't need to be, chasing starting pitchers that are just underpriced when they're not in a good spot. Ciccone's not a bad pitcher, but he's not good. So, underpriced, but no real reason to actually get to him. The Dodgers are going to look good if you can afford them. Obviously, they are really expensive, but Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Hernandez, Smith. These guys all look good if you can find the salary. From a stacking standpoint, I would expect to get to the Dodgers more often in like 2-mans and 3-mans because of the salaries. If we look at 2-mans, the Dodgers are coming in 5th most often. 3-mans, 5th most often. 4-mans, they drop down a bit. 5-mans, they're not even on the screen. So that really just speaks to the salaries and the fact that there's good pitching on the slate. If this were a slate where pitching weren't very good at the top, then maybe it's a little bit easier to justify getting to 5-man Dodger stacks. But obviously, it's going to be really, really tough to build lineups around these guys. It's going to be easier to use them as 2-mans, 3-mans. Fit in Ohtani, Betts, Smith with like a 5-man Seattle stack or something like that. Ownership is pretty low. You're getting double-digit ownership to Ohtani and Betts. Nothing surprising there. Obviously, that's warranted. But whatever else you can get to from the Dodgers is going to work as a contrarian play. Also, Arizona on the other side, tough matchup with Yamamoto. If you want to get to them because of Yamamoto's ownership and their talent level, that's fine. But there's nothing that stands out and makes them look particularly good. So that's all from a game-by-game standpoint. Pretty weird slate. A lot of good pitching. Not really any offenses that stood out as something that I really love. But because there is so much good pitching on the slate, overall pitching wise, Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray, Tanner Houck, Yamamoto, Taj Bradley, my top 5. I like all of those guys. From a contrarian standpoint, Reed Detmers is kind of interesting. Sonny Gray, I think, is going on their own. Dean Kramer, probably my favorite, all things considered, as far as contrarian pitchers. Offensively, Kansas City and Detroit showing up a lot for me right now. Field's not really there. Neither pitcher in that game is bad, but again, there's not really too much bad pitching on this slate. So I am interested in them. I like Seattle quite a bit because of their salaries and the park that they're hitting in. Houston is a popular offense that I think, they're one of the better offenses on the slate, but I do think they're going a little bit over-owned, at least right now. Milwaukee going up against Weathers looks pretty solid as well. Home run pick, I will go with Willy Adames against Miami, even though the park's not good for home runs. I do like that matchup quite a bit for Adames. Could also go William Contreras. He's been unbelievably good. But that's all I have for you. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. If you subscribe to my MLB Dub Club package, I'll be around in Discord. Feel free to hit me up there. And also, don't forget to reach out with any video ideas that you want, strategy-wise, that you want to see me talk about. Thanks for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight.